What I'd like to do this afternoon, if it is afternoon for you, is give you a quick overview of our climate literacy and energy awareness network, um, tools for supporting youth agency and mental health. And this webinar, as well as a couple last week, were spurred by the publication of a recent article in the Lancet journal, which was looking at climate emotions, thoughts, and plans among US adolescents and young adults. That was published just on October 17th. And we wanted to take a minute with this study coming out to highlight our aligned resources. I think that a lot of us have heard or are familiar with or are working directly with young people or students who are having mental health challenges. And climate change is now the #1 mental health challenge for young people in the United States, which is a pretty staggering thing to consider. You can see the spread of emotions that young people cite feeling here. This is from a 2021 study by Hickman, but this is a graph from the study that just came out a couple weeks ago. And you don't really have to squint too much here and dig in. You might be able to find your state if you look closely. But what I want to highlight, this is the biggest study by the numbers that has come out focused specifically on the United States, looking at over 15,000 participants from across all 50 states. And you can see there is some differences in how young people are feeling about climate change and mental health and where they're at and how worried they are. But overall, most states are beyond 50% of young people, and this is focused on 16 to 25-year-olds. So most folks are feeling either very or extremely worried. And that is pretty outrageous to note. We really have an issue that I don't think we've spent a lot of time looking at how to address. I think in addition to this very and extremely concerned area here, something especially interesting to note in this recent study is looking at how many young people are not at all worried about climate change and its impacts. Very, very few. So the vast majority, I'd say, is a safe way to put it, are concerned to some degree and most to a large degree about climate change. When we look at how to move forward with those statistics in mind, one of the most powerful things we can do is promote hope and agency. And when we talk about hope, it's not that kind of amorphous hope that like, oh, science will solve this for us, so we don't have to worry. I'm really talking about the specific type of hope, which is highlighted by Maria Oyala and looking at hope theory. And this type of hope says that we hope because we can see a solution, we can see a pathway to the solution, and we know that we have the ability to help move down that pathway. Additionally, I think that looking at hope along with what we need to do to process emotion and build the skills to work through that worry and anxiety that young people are feeling is incredibly important. And one of the biggest ways to help with both that anxiety and worry is to look at agency and action. And that's really borne out in a number of recent studies. I want to highlight that this is a really awesome time to be considering these questions and looking at these studies because climate education is evolving quickly and on a very large scale in the US. When we look at the recently published climate literacy principles for understanding and addressing climate change, they look significantly different than the climate literacy principles published in 2009 that were focused mainly on climate science. These principles are significant because they help guide education and policy nationally. From those 2009 principles, they heavily influenced the addition of climate change and where it fit in the NGSS, the Next Generation Science Standards. And I think that these new principles will also have a pretty significant impact across the board. So when we look at the changes, they're subtle, but they're so important to help addressing the um, climate, mental health, and agency pieces of the puzzle. We've moved from understanding the essential principles of Earth systems to add not only do we understand, but we understand the options to address human caused climate change. Moving from we know how to assess information to we know where to find it and how to access it. Moving from communication to accurate and effective communication, communication that does what the speaker intends. If you're working with specific audiences, it meets those audiences where they're at. And finally, the new principles get rid of a lot of the ambiguity that featured in the older climate literacy principles. They move us from this language of we make responsible decisions with regard to actions that may affect climate directly to make informed decisions related to climate change. So you can see these new climate literacy principles have shifted into that space of agency and action. When we look at the principles themselves and how they have evolved, the climate literacy principles have moved from a set, this is the 2009 set. The first four here focus on the climate system. We know where energy is coming from. We know a lot happens to it when it gets here. Life impacts it and is affected by it, and it varies. That's a lot of space in those principles to define the system before we say, and we really understand it because of our modeling and observation capabilities. And because we understand it, we know humans are impacting it and those impacts have consequences. Interestingly, this guiding principle was pulled out and separated um, with the idea that it would apply to all of these seven, but in practice, it remains separate, that humans can take action and change the scenario here. So these are the older principles. When we look at the new principles, um, it moves to saying at the very beginning, we understand the system that we're navigating when it comes to climate change. We've really got it down. And again, getting rid of that ambiguity, the problem is greenhouse gas. It is impacting Earth's climate. We know that that's coming from burning fossil fuels, and we know that that's causing rapid warming that threatens the systems. Really getting rid of that ambiguity. I had a question last week at a conference I thought was applicable here. We talk about that difference in language between global warming and climate change. I think of it as warming is what's happening to the system, and climate change is what is happening specifically to your local area or region, which may not look like warming, does look like change because the system is warming. So those four principles change quite a bit from the old ones, but here's where it gets really interesting. In five, they add in climate justice, which is directly related to mental health and agency. Six and seven separate out and address adaptation and mitigation. And instead of saying there's some things we can do, this is very directly saying we must work towards adaptation and we must work towards mitigation at the same time and now. And finally, this essential principle eight, which I think is deeply important to lean into when it comes to mental health, is basically looking at hope. We can create a sustainable future. We need to work quickly, justice focused, and focused on transformational actions, not those that tiptoe around the edges. But this new set of climate literacy principles is powerful and really substantiates a lot of the work that we've been doing with the Climate Literacy and Energy Awareness Network over the past few years. I want to take a few minutes and highlight the resources that are supported by and directly support those new climate literacy principles, which help establish youth agency and that focus on action. I'm just going to take about 5 to 10 minutes to do this and kind of buzz through, and then we'll leave at least 10 minutes for questions at the end because we're covering a lot of ground quickly here. So the first thing I want to highlight is this new understanding, and let's step back for a minute. When you go to the CLEAN website, which is cleannet.org, this is where you'll land. If you go to Teaching Climate and Energy, it'll take you here, and this front and center tab, Understanding and Addressing Climate Change, will take you to those 8 new climate literacy principles that you can explore. This is a page in progress, so there'll be more added to it as we go. But if I click on any one of these principles, it'll discuss how you might bring those ideas into your classroom. And at the moment, provide teaching materials for middle and high school level students. I'll be adding elementary and college level resources in the next month or so. So please check back for additional support. I'll also add other more broad resources and a little bit more on the background of these literacy principles. But first stop, check out those new addressing and understanding climate change principles. Next, if you go to, again, our homepage, Teaching Climate and Energy, we have the climate mental health pages, which are right here. If you go to the mental health pages, you'll see a couple elements that I think are really helpful. These are 9 strategies for mental health. Note that they start with self-care. When you're doing this work of supporting youth and navigating climate change as an educator or an outreach professional, or just as a person in society, I think that it's really important not to forget that that can take a toll, and we have to pay attention to what we need to sustain our own energy and process our own emotions. So start there. Next, you can look at these other strategies that all include a bit of background about the strategies and teaching resources to help you bring these to your students or community. In addition to the 9 strategies, you can find our our specific activities guide. These are activities that were designed by CLEAN and the Climate Mental Health Network, along with a few other partners. They were tested and piloted in classrooms and got teacher feedback. There's a lot here, but these activities are meant to be added into other lessons you're doing or serve as individual lessons occasionally. They support K through 12 students. They can last 5 minutes or an hour, depending on the activity you do. But take a look through the activities, consider where you might add them into your work. In addition to the climate mental health pages, a few other areas to consider finding support for creating youth agency. We've got the National Climate Assessment pages here. The most recent National Climate Assessment, the 5th National Climate Assessment, was published pretty recently, and it just came out last fall. And our resources here match the National Climate Assessment regions. You can go to any region, and in that region in CLEAN, you can find a little information about the region, and then you can go down to the key messages from the region, look at guiding questions to explore those key messages, and example lessons and videos to explore those guiding questions. You can also find pathways to action in each region. These are focused on classroom level climate action, and they include a description of the action, a regional case study based on the Climate Resiliency Toolkit, and then a classroom level climate action with some resources to support that. So a lot going on here in the National Climate Assessment Educators support pages. If you go down to this climate action section in these National Climate Assessment Educator support pages, this takes the actions from all of the regions and offers them here, along with separating them out into hazard-focused classroom level climate actions. So if you're looking at hazards and community resilience, which is really useful, especially if you're in a region that makes it politically or politically difficult on a large scale or on a community level to teach about climate change, you can probably still teach about hazards and community resilience and look at the classroom level climate actions here to provide support. And finally, the last set of resources I want to highlight to support youth agency are these teaching across the curriculum pages. When we think about supporting youth agency, part of it is moving beyond science. A big part of the last 10 or 15 years in climate change education has focused on how do we get people familiar with the fact that climate change is happening and the causes of it from the science perspective. But now I think we've largely established that, and the publication of the new climate literacy principles provide a lot of support to show that we've established that and can now move beyond it. So moving beyond it looks like giving students and communities the tools to consider how to address climate change. And doing that gets complicated because you're delving into realms of policy and engineering, green energy, civics. You're looking at how things, how energy solutions pencil out with the numbers and in that math realm. You're considering how to engage emotional response in addition to cognitive response through the arts. So you have to move beyond the science to promote the systems thinking that's necessary to consider climate solutions. And we've got these teaching across the curriculum pages as a start. We're going to continue to build these as we expand this project in the coming year. But in each one of these subject pages, you'll see ideas for which areas of this subject you might teach about climate, and some example lessons by grade band. So that was a lot. We jumped into the new Understanding and Addressing Climate Change support pages that look at the new climate literacy principles and how to support those. We took a glance at the climate mental health pages and the national climate assessment pages here, and the teaching across the curriculum pages. Lots of resources in the clean teaching climate and energy section here to support promoting youth agency and action. And lots of directions you can take those with your students in classrooms, whether you want to take the ideas and the concepts and weave them in or look at lessons directly. So I am going to pause there and ask if there are any questions or requests based on buzzing through what I just showed. I'm also going to stop the recording. So feel free to jump in. I think, Gina, you've made it possible for anybody to jump into the chat, it looks like. So if you can put your questions in the chat, that would be awesome. And thanks for jumping into this quick overview. I hope it was helpful.